Hello, and welcome to this lesson on unpacking your eating triggers. One of the common cognitive distortions that I see holding individuals with disordered eating back from recovery is all or nothing thinking. And so, what is all or nothing thinking? Well, it is a pattern of negative thoughts, and this is usually what we call a cognitive distortion. And so all could be that slippery slope of over or under eating or feeling out of control around food. And nothing could involve deprivation or restriction. And so it's this complex system of neurochemicals, brain chemicals, and hormones that is playing in the background of our behaviors. And so all or nothing thinking can sound like, I try to be good when I've eaten something bad. I eat really well during the week, but I blow out on the weekend. I punish myself with X, Y, and Z when I haven't been good enough. I have tried to quit sugar, alcohol, carbohydrates, only to binge on them later. Or I feel like nothing I ever do is good enough. And so we can see that this all or nothing thinking is this pattern of negative thoughts. And it's this pendulum between two extremes, from one to the other, of good and bad, of healthy and unhealthy, of right and of wrong. And so having this pattern of negative thoughts can lead to a decrease in confidence and self-esteem, less willingness to take risks, feeling like a failure, the fear of asking for help, unable to think of solutions or find a middle ground, a lack of self-compassion, less resilience, or being unwilling or unable to forgive yourself. And so what are some of the strategies that we can use to let go of all or nothing thinking? Well, we can start to try and be aware of your thinking patterns, letting go of those food rules, focusing on the things that you are doing well, giving yourself permission to eat foods that you enjoy, and practicing self-compassion and then moving on. And so all or nothing thinking is a complex system of brain chemicals and hormones. And so the interesting thing is that eating is mediated by brain pathways for motivation and reinforcement. And we spoke about this in an earlier lesson where there are wires and pathways in our brain of thought patterns, and they can be our defaults, but we can build new thought patterns. And so two key critical brain chemicals that are released in our brain is dopamine, and this is a chemical that's released in the brain that makes you feel good. And then you've got serotonin, and serotonin controls your mood and is responsible for feelings of happiness. And so it's the dysregulation of these two brain chemicals that make up that brain reward system. And so for those with disordered eating, we know through the research that dopamine increases when we eat highly palatable food. We also know that disordered eating feels more pleasurable to some people, and that's because their dopamine sensitivity changes or they produce more. In terms of serotonin, we know that restriction leads to lower serotonin levels. And so that's maybe why some people don't feel as happy when they're eating or when they're around food. And it is also that they feel less of a response to eating and more anxiety around food. And so these levels fluctuate, and the sensitivity to these brain chemicals will change with disordered eating. The thing to keep in mind though is that you can stabilize these brain chemical changes by improving your eating habits to a degree. And so in terms of eating triggers, we know that people eat for a variety of different reasons. Most of them are complex and interrelated. And so think about, what are some of the things that get you in the mood to eat? These are some examples of ones that I hear my clients refer to. So we may be feeling the trigger to eat if we are physically hungry, if we're anxious, if there's an abundance or an availability of food, if we're feeling lonely, or we want a distraction, or there's a celebration going. All of these reasons to eat are equally valid. There are a variety of reasons why you may be triggered to want to eat, And so some of these reasons can be specific to you, and they depend on a lot of different factors, as we've already discussed. And so there is no right or wrong reason to eat, but knowing your triggers can help you to heal your relationship with food. Another helpful technique that we can use to rebuild that relationship with food and eating is a technique called urge surfing. And so this is something that we can use once we are feeling triggered. And it is a technique that can be used to avoid acting on any behavior that you want to reduce or to stop. It involves riding the wave of strong emotions or distress by stepping back from your experience and using mindfulness skills. It also involves noticing the urge to enact an eating disorder behaviors without giving in to those behaviors. This can be described with the analogy of a wave. And so urge surfing is a technique to manage your unwanted behaviors. And so rather than giving into the urge, you would ride it out, just like a surfer would ride out a wave. And so it always follows this same progression. An urge is triggered by a person, place, thought, feeling, or something else. This leads to the rise, and so the urge increases in intensity, and this may happen gradually or very suddenly. It then reaches a peak where the urge reaches its most intense point, and it may feel as if the urge will never go away. And then eventually the urge will lose its intensity and eventually fades away, and that is the fall phase of urge surfing. And so there are these 3 steps that we can take and practice urge surfing. And so the first one is to acknowledge that you are having an urge. The second one is to notice your thoughts and feelings without trying to change or suppress them. And then the third one is to remind yourself that an urge is temporary. Like any other feeling, it will pass on its own. And so you can use other reaffirming statements like, it is okay to have urges. They are natural reactions to addictions or habits. An urge is just a feeling, not a must. And so I can have this feeling and choose not to act on it. And then the last one, some discomfort is okay, but I don't have to change it. I can wait it out. And so urge surfing can be a really useful tool when you are trying to navigate disordered eating behaviors. For some, it could be urge surfing the desire to binge or to overeat. And for others, it could be urge surfing the desire to restrict eating and to avoid food or avoid situations where you can be feeling triggered. And so you can really use this technique and tailor it to a behavior that maybe you are trying to reduce. And so moving on from our eating triggers, one of the tricky things that a lot of my clients experience during this process of learning intuitive eating is the honeymoon period. And so if you haven't heard of the honeymoon period, it is this period where people fear that you will become out of control around food or overeat certain foods. And so usually this is when previously off-limit foods feel more exciting, new, and more of a novelty, and therefore people gravitate towards those foods more than other alternatives. What is basically happening is that those foods are triggering the brain reward system. So back when we were talking about dopamine and serotonin, these foods are triggering the release of those brain chemicals. And so it is okay if you are eating a larger quantity at this point in time whilst you are still giving yourself unconditional permission to eat food. The biggest thing is that if you trust this process, you will build your own self-trust towards food. And that is because over time, letting go of those food rules means that any food is an option. And so there is no deprivation, restriction, cycle, or pull towards certain foods, making it difficult for you to rebuild that relationship with food. And so to further explain the honeymoon period, imagine you are trying to breathe through a straw. Initially, it can feel really hard, forced, and not satisfying, almost like you're not getting enough oxygen. And so when you give yourself unconditional permission to eat and allow all foods as an option, this is like removing the straw, removing that boundary and that barrier. And so, yes, it may take a few breaths to reoxygenate the body, but after a while, your body tunes and you breathe normally again. This is the same thing with eating. When your disordered eating behaviors was that safe straw and boundary, and now that we have removed that as a safety mechanism, a coping mechanism, it may take you a bit of time to get used to being able to breathe again, being able to eat all foods, readjusting your portion sizes, identifying what comfortable fullness feels like for you and when you should be responding to hunger and listening to your body. So it can take a period of time, and so just being patient with the process, and eventually you will get the hang of it. And so dieting and restriction can be like the straw, confining you to certain foods and set amounts. And so by taking away those food rules, that may take some time and to build trust around food. And so there is a way through the honeymoon period, and basically that is due to some biological reasons. We've got this alimentary alesthesia, which means that there is a connection between your senses and eating. So your sense of smell and your sense of taste, as well as your vision. And it is a way for your body to moderate your food choices and the amounts of foods that you eat. And so after the first bite of food, the taste may change or it isn't as palatable. And that's what we were talking about in the last lesson when we were talking about sensory specific satiety and habituation. And so we can see here that when the body feels satisfied with a specific nutrient, it'll decrease that palatability for that food, and therefore we can vary our intake. And the same thing is when we need a certain nutrient, our body will increase that palatability so that we can go and eat it a little bit more of that. And so strategies to manage through this honeymoon period. So the first thing is we want to make peace with food and allow all foods. So that is consistent no matter what we are doing. We want to align your food choices with foods that you actually enjoy eating, because this is going to rebuild the relationship back with food. We want to practice mindful eating, because this means that we tune into our senses, tune into our bodies, and get a better understanding of what comfortable fullness feels like. We want to try and not be too hard on ourselves, as this is part of the process. And this is what I like to call the testing period to my patients or to my clients, because it is tricky to get through this period, and it's kind of, you're lurking through the muck, but eventually you will come through with a better idea of how to navigate food. And so take every opportunity to eat as a way to build experience and trust. And so to end, think of the honeymoon period of intuitive eating as a trust building exercise. Basically, it is a time for you to learn how to give yourself full permission with food, and to truly believe that the food that you love will always be there in the future. Thank you so much for listening to this lesson. I have activities that you can start putting into practice from this module's guidebook. And remember to please like, subscribe, or share this video with others who may find it helpful.